The first thing people say when they find out how much money my family has is, "Oh, you must have had such a wonderful life." And I smile, because the truth is so much more complicated than that, and so much more ordinary. Because wealth doesn't protect you from longing. It doesn't protect you from your parents' expectations, or your own wrong choices, or the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by everything except the one thing you actually want. My name is Serena. My family owns one of the largest real estate development companies on the East Coast. Our name is on buildings in Manhattan, in Boston, in Chicago. I grew up in a house that had a name. Not a number, a name. And I wore uniforms to school and vacationed in places other kids read about in geography class. And I was profoundly, privately unhappy for most of my 20s. This is the story of how that changed. My father, Edward Whitfield, is what people in business call a titan, and what people who know him well call relentless. He built his company from a single property his own father left him, a crumbling warehouse in South Boston, into a multi-billion-dollar development empire. He did it through work that bordered on obsession, through deals made at midnight and relationships cultivated over decades, through a willingness to outwork and outweight everyone in the room. I admired him for this. I also spent most of my childhood watching him from a distance, because he was rarely home, and when he was still somehow elsewhere, on the phone, in his head, thinking about the next deal. My mother, Catherine, was a force in her own right, a former attorney who had set aside her career when I was born and channeled her considerable intelligence into running our social life, which in our world was basically another form of business. I am their only child, the heir, the person in whom all of this was supposed to continue. I got my law degree from Penn, which pleased my father. I did 2 years at a firm in New York, which exhausted me but built my credibility. And then, at 28, I came home, joined the family company as head of legal and compliance, took my place at the table. From the outside, a success story, a dynasty continuing, everything going according to plan. Inside, I felt like I was wearing someone else's life. His name was Daniel. We met in the most unromantic way possible, a zoning dispute. His firm had designed a mixed-use development project in Somerville, a neighborhood that was changing, and we were on opposite sides of a very dull legal argument about setback requirements. He was 33. He had his own small firm, 8 people, scrappy, fiercely principled. He was not from money. He had gotten his architecture degree on loans and scholarships, had spent his first years out of school working on affordable housing projects that paid almost nothing. He still took on a certain percentage of pro bono work every year because, as he told me later, someone has to remember that buildings are for people, not just for investors. Our first interaction was a conference call that lasted 2 hours and ended with neither of us having moved at all on our positions. When it was over, I sat alone in my office and realized I was smiling. Not the professional, managed smile I performed constantly in meetings. Actually smiling. The dispute went on for 3 months. We had 4 in-person meetings. I told myself each one was strictly professional. I was a very convincing liar when it came to myself. At the end of the 4th meeting, walking to the elevator, he said, "You're very good at this, you know." At winning arguments? At making people feel heard even when you're disagreeing with them. It's rarer than you'd think. I pushed the elevator button. "You're pretty good at holding your ground yourself," I said. He smiled. Easy. Unperformed. I built this case on principle. Principle is actually easier to defend than strategy. The elevator came. He held the door. "If we ever end up on the same side of something," he said, I think we'd be unstoppable. I thought about that for the entire drive home. The dispute was eventually resolved, a compromise that satisfied no one entirely and everyone partially, which is the best you can hope for in these things. There was no professional reason for us to stay in contact. He emailed me 2 weeks later, a link to an article about adaptive reuse architecture, converting old buildings into new purposes while preserving their structure. Reminded me of something you said about precedent, he wrote. That was it. No ask, no agenda. I read the article. Then I read 3 more on the same topic. Then I replied with a question. He answered. I answered his answer. We emailed back and forth for 6 weeks before either of us acknowledged what this actually was. I knew what it was. I knew exactly what it was. And I also knew the complications. He was not in our world. My father, if he knew, would conduct a full background check, which I knew because he had done this with previous men I dated, and he would find exactly what he'd be looking for. No family connections, no political relationships, no legacy. A self-made architect who drove a used Subaru and had a studio apartment in Cambridge. My father would say, "That's not who you build a dynasty with." We had dinner for the first time in November. A small Italian restaurant in Cambridge, checkered tablecloths, the owner came out to explain the specials personally. The kind of place I would never have chosen in my usual world. It was the best dinner I had had in years. He told me about his family. His parents were both teachers, grew up outside of Worcester. He talked about a community library project he was working on, a small town in western Massachusetts that wanted to renovate their 1920s library but had almost no budget. He was doing most of it pro bono. Why? I asked. Because libraries matter, he said. Because that town deserves a beautiful space, not just a functional one. And because someone left me a scholarship that let me get through grad school, and I figure I owe the universe something back. I sat across from him in that checkered tablecloth restaurant and thought, I have never, in my entire adult life, dated a man who talked this way, who thought this way. My last relationship had been with a private equity associate who talked about his bonus structure on our second date. Here was a man telling me about a library in a small town. I was completely unprepared for how much that meant to me. My father found out about Daniel the way my father finds out about most things. Someone told him. Not me. He called me on a Sunday morning. I hear you've been seeing someone. I set down my coffee. I'm not sure that's your business, Dad. Anyone you're involved with is my business, Serena. You know this. That's not actually how that works. Silence. My father was very good at weaponizing silence. I looked him up, he said. The architect. Small firm, no connections, no real capital. He's building something he believes in. That's very inspiring. It doesn't build an empire. Maybe I don't want to build an empire, Dad. I said it before I thought about it, and once it was out, I couldn't take it back. Didn't want to. Excuse me? I'm 30 years old. I have been doing exactly what you asked of me my entire life. Penn, New York, coming home, this job. I have never, not once, done something purely because I wanted to. You have a responsibility. I have a life. My life. I get to live it. Another silence. Longer. You're going to throw everything away for a man who drives a Subaru. Dad, I'm going to end this call now. I love you, but I'm going to end it. I hung up. My hands were shaking slightly. I sat at my kitchen table for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone and texted Daniel. "Are you free tonight?" He was. I went to see my mother a week later, alone, without my father. My mother was in the garden. She has always kept an extraordinary garden, which I think is her true self more than anything else about her. When she saw my face, she put down her shears. We sat on the porch with iced tea. "Tell me about him," she said, before I'd said anything. I told her. The whole thing. The zoning call, the emails, the dinner, the library project. I watched her face as I spoke. She was listening fully, giving nothing away. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like a man with something to offer that money can't provide," she said. "Yes." She looked at me steadily. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it and not be upset with me." "Okay." "I married your father because I believed in him. I loved him. That's real." She paused. "But I also made certain adjustments to who I was, my career, my friendships. I made those adjustments gradually over years, and I told myself they were choices, and they were. But I was choosing for us, and for our name, and for an idea of what our family should be. And somewhere in there, I stopped asking what I wanted." "Mom." "I'm not unhappy, Serena. Please understand that. But there are things I put down 30 years ago that I never picked back up, and I think about that sometimes." "What things?" She smiled, quiet, a little sad. "I wanted to run a legal aid organization. I was very good at the law. Your grandfather thought it was a phase." She paused. I let him think that. I sat with that for a long moment. "Mom," I said, "you could still... I'm 61. It's a different conversation at 61. "No, it isn't. It's literally not." She laughed, a real laugh. Then she looked at me very seriously. "Don't put things down, Serena. Whatever you put down at 30, you'll be calculating the cost of at 60. Don't do what I did." I went to my father's office. I asked for an actual meeting, not a phone call, not a dinner, a meeting. On the record, in his space. I sat across from him at his enormous desk and I said, "Dad, I'm not ending things with Daniel. I want to be clear about that." He opened his mouth. "And," I said, "I want to talk about the company. Not today, but I think we need to have a real conversation about what the future of it looks like. Because I don't think the future it needs is the one you're picturing. And I think on some level you know that too." He was quiet for a long moment. "He's not one of us," he said finally. "I know. That's not a disqualification, Dad. That's just a fact." He swiveled slightly in his chair. He was thinking. I knew that look. "If you're going to be with someone outside our world," he said carefully, "you need to be sure he can handle what our world brings." That's a fair concern, and I'm having that conversation with him. He studied me. "You've gotten very direct," he said. "I learned from the best," I said. Something shifted in his face, something almost like respect. I told Daniel everything, about my family in detail, about the expectations and what came with them, about the profiles and the board and the fact that people would write about him once they realized we were serious, about my father's background check, which had already happened. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "That's it? Okay? What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me if this is too much." He thought about it. "It's a lot," he said honestly. "I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Worcester. This is a lot. But Serena, none of that is about you. You're not your family's portfolio. You're a person, and I'm interested in the person. My father will try to pressure you. I'll manage. People will write things. I build things for a living. I don't particularly care what critics say as long as the building stands. I looked at him across the table. You know I'm in this, right? He said. I'm in this. I exhaled, something I had been holding for months. I'm in this too, I said. 6 months later, the library in Western Massachusetts had its opening. Small ceremony, a few hundred people from the town, local press, members of the community. At the opening, Daniel spoke briefly. He thanked his team. He thanked the town. He said, "A library is a building that says everyone who walks through this door belongs here." That's what we tried to build. The town librarian, a woman in her 70s who had been at that library for 4 decades, started crying. I stood in the back of that ceremony, in a town I'd never heard of a year ago, watching people who had nothing to do with my world celebrate something that mattered deeply to them. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years at any of our events, our galas, our groundbreaking ceremonies. I felt like I was somewhere real. My father and Daniel met officially for the first time at a dinner my mother organized, deliberately low-key, deliberately at our house. My father was polite. Daniel was calm. My mother was spectacular. By the end of the night, my father asked Daniel a question about structural engineering. A real question, a technical one. And the conversation that followed lasted 45 minutes and was genuinely interesting to both of them. My mother caught my eye across the table and gave me the tiniest nod. Afterward, my father said to me, "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone less grounded." "He's the most grounded person I know," I said. My father looked at me for a long moment, and I saw it, briefly, barely, a flicker of something that might have been pride. "Your mother likes him," he said finally. "I know." "Your mother is a very good judge of character." "I know that too, Dad." It's been 2 years since that first conference call about setback requirements. Daniel and his firm are now working on a project for us, a mixed income development that was his idea and that my father agreed to, because the numbers made sense, and because I pushed hard, and because my father, underneath everything, does believe in building things that matter. My mother, 6 months ago, began volunteering with a legal aid organization in Boston. She called me afterward. "You were right," she said. "It's not too late." "It's never too late," I said. "I'm still mad I waited this long." "Use it. Channel it." She laughed, the same laugh she laughed that day in the garden. I want to tell you something that took me a long time to learn. Being the heir to something is not the same as inheriting it. You can inherit a title, a company, a name on a building. What you cannot inherit is a sense of purpose. What you cannot inherit is the feeling of standing in a small-town library, watching a 70-year-old librarian cry because something beautiful was built for her community. What you cannot inherit is the person you choose to love and why you choose them. Those things you have to build yourself. My name is Serena. My family's name is on buildings from here to Chicago. And for a long time, I thought that name was the most important thing about me. Now I know better. The most important thing about me is that I stopped letting other people write my story. That I walked into a meeting about a zoning dispute, and somewhere in the middle of a very tedious argument, I caught a glimpse of who I actually wanted to be. That I had the courage, barely, imperfectly, terrified the whole time, to follow that glimpse. My mother puts things down and picks them back up at 61. My father is slowly, stubbornly learning that legacy can mean more than money. Daniel is designing another library in another small town that will matter to people whose names I will learn. And I am standing in the middle of my own life. Finally, for the first time. It is not as polished as what I grew up with. It is not as certain. It is so much better. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt like you were living someone else's version of your life, please subscribe. Every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it is worth your time. And leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching this from. It means more than you know. I read every single one.